Yo, what is up, disc golfers? This is Adam with High Action Disc Golf. Today I've got a special treat for you. I've got a walkthrough and course review of my home course here in Paris, Texas. As far as I know, this course has never been filmed. If it has, it definitely hasn't been posted on YouTube. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off on hole 1 at Walker Park, we've got a 260-foot par 3. OB is the driveway and beyond that you can see on the left side. Their standard righty backhand play is a light turnover with a putter or a mid-range to get around a tree that's about 100 to 120 feet in front of you. The lefty backhand play is just something straight with a little bit of finish at the end to finish right over to the basket. Throwing my C-Line MD3 here, just try to throw straight on the left side, push it straight and let it fade over. Wind up landing just a little bit short here. Probably leave myself to about a 22 to 23 footer. Wind is blowing left to right. We've got about a 10 to 15 mile an hour wind out of the northwest today. That kind of comes into play a few times. I'm stepping up with my 300 PA3 and squeak it in just over the rim to take a birdie for the very first hole. Hole 2, we've got our first par 4 of the course at 390 feet. Pretty soft par 4. Basket is tucked just to the left of the large tree that's just right of center frame. Only OB to speak of on this hole is a culvert that runs right through the middle of the course. It actually is just right of that tree, so that can come into play on this hole. And if you really juice it, you can throw it long into the road, OB. Wide open hole, lefty or righty, just throwing a hyzer. Throwing my prototype Zeus here, hanging a little bit left. Luckily, it's got just a little bit of a bite, so it actually finishes back toward the basket. Leaves me with about a 100 to 120 footer for an upshot. I step up to my lie, and I decide to go with a gentle flick with my exo hard tactic. Now, I'm predominantly a backhand player and don't have a particularly strong forehand, but I can use it within probably about 150 to maybe 175 feet for some gentle approaches. So, with the left or right crosswind, I felt like this was the play. Just step up, toss it easy, see if we can't dunk it. Oh, and just flashed the chains, almost dunked it, but leaves me with about a 10-footer for my birdie. And again, step up here for the easy tap in for the birdie. You do have to be careful too, because that hill definitely comes into play rolling down to that culvert. So another reason why I decided to throw the forehand versus the backhand, because if you hit that hill 9 times out of 10, you're going to land right into that culvert and be putting for par instead. Moving on to hole 3, we've got a 210-foot par 3. Slightly uphill, only OB to speak of is OB long into the road. The basket is tucked just to the left of the furthest tree in frame. The righty play is usually a forehand around the large tree that's close to the center frame and just let it hyzer back to the basket. The lefty play is definitely the stock hyzer, just around that tree and let it work to the basket. Slight headwind, so I decided to throw my exo hard tactic here just to make sure that it doesn't turn over. And wind up throwing it just a little bit short, give myself probably about a 20-footer, maybe an 18-footer for my birdie. And as you can see, already on hole 3, I've given myself my second tester putt of the day. This headwind really kind of getting to me a little bit, pushing my drives a little bit short. Gonna have to make the adjustment for that. But I step up and squeak it just over the rim to take my third birdie for the day. Hole 4, we've got a par 3, 225 feet, slightly downhill. The only OB is the culvert that is probably about 60 to maybe 70 feet past the basket. Pretty stock hyzer for the lefty. The righty, you do have to watch for the tree that's tucked just right of the basket because that can come into play. With the tailwind, I step up with my active sensei and just try to throw it straight at the basket. And actually grip it a little bit and wind up hanging it out a little bit left to give myself yet another tester for the day. Wind up giving myself about a 22 to 23 footer yet again. And as you can see, this is not a basket that you want any kind of tester putt on. A shredder has hit the cage on this multiple times and it is a mangled mess. So you definitely don't want a tester, and if you miss, you're probably blaming the basket. But I managed to hit left side, dunk it, and take my 4th birdie of the round. Hole 5, we've got the only par 5 on the course at 690 feet. OB is the road and beyond on the right side, and the basket is all the way down the road at the edge of the property behind the large trees in center frame. The righty backhand play definitely is hanging out over that OB and crashing it around those trees, with the lefty backhand play being much more forgiving and wide open. I take my S-Line DD3 here, with a slight tailwind, I try to flip up to flat, maybe even turn it a little bit, just whatever can give me a wide open angle for my approach shot coming up. I wind up doing exactly that and leave myself about 350 to the basket, nice and over on the left. Now there are 3 guardian trees up here close to the basket that really love to gobble up your discs if you don't hit the gap, so it can make it relatively difficult to reach the basket. I decided to step up with my S-Line PD2, just want to rip it out flat and let the stability pull to the basket and hopefully hit the gap. You see there, I stopped myself with my run up the first time. This land out here is very soft and mole trails are everywhere, so it's kind of like running up in sand. You have to be really careful not to twist your ankle here. So I center myself and take my second run up, throw it out nice and flat just like I want to, and throw it straight into the base of one of those guardian trees. I leave myself with probably about 80 feet to the basket pinned directly behind this tree. Decide to take my exo hard tactic and step out on a light flick, maybe with a little bit of anhyzer. Just something to try to just push over to the basket and take my birdie. Now I don't have a whole lot of forehand touch, I'm not going to lie. So I actually wound up juicing it a little bit and throwing it about 20 feet past the basket to give myself yet another tester putt for my birdie. Put myself right on the edge of the woods, probably at about 18, maybe 20 feet. Thankfully just on the edge though, and I did not throw it in. So as long as I'm careful and just kind of step around some of the limbs and debris and give myself a decent footing so that I can at least attempt this putt for a birdie. Thankfully the wind is blocked by all these trees, so I don't really have any wind to speak of. I squeak it just over the rim to take my 5th birdie of the round. Hole 6, we have our first real gap, 260 foot par 3 to a blind pin tucked around to the right just out of the mouth of the gap. The righty play is definitely a flex forehand, something a little stable that's going to work back to the basket late in the flight. For the lefty, I like to throw something nice and flat and just let it finish straight out of the mouth of the gap. I step up with my C-Line MD3, and the only goal here is hit the gap, hit the gap, hit the gap. Because if you kick off to the right into the woods, these woods are very unforgiving, and you will definitely take a bogey at best. Wind up catching some little ghost branches, actually, that are just up there at the mouth of the gap, and it kicks me down a little short, probably about 70 feet or so from the basket. And if you saw my face right there, I heard the craziest noise. It was either the most pitch-perfect dog that's ever existed, or a chainsaw. Not really sure which. So anyway, step up here and gonna try a step putt. I'm really working on either the step putt or the jump putt, and I haven't figured out which one feels more comfortable to me. So I decided to go with the stepper here. I get decently close, not really running it, just wanted to put it up under the pin to take my par. With how picture perfect this hole is for the lefty backhand, I definitely prefer to take a birdie, but I'll accept my par because I've kicked off into these woods more times than I'd like to share and had to settle for bogey and double bogeys. Hole 7, we've got one of the more difficult holes on the course, 330 foot par 3. If you see the 2 trees that are in the center frame, the basket is just behind the further tree that's slightly on the right. The righty backhand play is definitely through the right gap over there, just right of those trees, and much easier to hit, with the lefty backhand play being on the left side with a considerable amount of branches out there, so you really have to push something straight and then finish late in the flight. I decided to throw my Lucid Felon here, just try to work around the trees and throw it low to maybe get under them in case it comes into play. Wind up getting around it, but actually tucked myself just behind the second tree, probably about 30-35 feet from the basket, slightly obstructed. And with this obstruction, I wind up taking a knee here to try to give myself a putt and maybe a chance at a birdie. This is not a hole that I birdie very often, so I'm very thankful if I do manage to get one, but definitely happy if I accept par on this one. And as you saw, hanging out just a little bit left, wind up leaving myself about 5 feet for the par. No problem there. This is definitely a bonus birdie for me. The other play on this hole that I've been trying to work on is a turnover shot through the right-hand gap, but I still haven't quite figured out the line on the turnover without yanking it, so that's actually a rather difficult shot for me. So for the time being, I still like to go with that straight pushing hyzer shot out to the left. Moving on to hole 8, we've got a 235 foot par 3, slightly downhill. The basket is center frame, tucked just right of the leftmost tree. The righty backhand play is definitely between the gap of the 2 large trees you see there, with the lefty play being hang it out to the left and let it crash into that tree on the left side. I've been doing a standstill here because for some reason running up, I always wind up juicing it too far. So I throw my active sensei nice and gentle, make sure that I get a hyzer, and it lands perfectly just in front of that tree to give me about a 10-footer for an easy tap-in birdie. This is another hole that the turnover play is really fun for the lefty to really try to give yourself an ace run, but it's not a play that I've really been able to work on a whole lot and really dial in. So I have worked on it a little bit, but I just prefer the hyzer play out to the left, much more consistent. Rounding out the front nine, we have one of my favorite holes, hole 9, 285-foot par 3. This is the bridge hole, with the basket just behind the bridge, slightly downhill. The righty backhand play, you have to be careful of the large tree on the right. That definitely comes into play. And the lefty backhand, if you hyzer too much, you have to worry about that telephone pole. But otherwise, it's a pretty wide open hole for the lefty. But with the tailwind, I actually decided to throw my Z Buzz straight at it. And this tailwind winds up stabling up the shot, and it leaks out to the right, skips out of the culvert, and puts me with about a 40-footer just on the other side of it for a major tester to finish out my front nine. So I'm definitely thankful that I managed to skip in bounds over on the other side, but about 40 feet is probably right at my max distance without trying to step or jump putt. So really have to center myself and dig deep to make sure that I make this one and have a really good front nine. And man, that one felt good. Fist bump, 40-footer, just on the left side, finishing with a 7 under par through the front nine. Kicking off the back nine, we have hole 10, 500-foot par 4, longest par 4 on the course. The OB culvert is on the left side, but typically doesn't come into play for the righty or the lefty. On your approach shot, there is also OB just behind the basket into a backyard with a fence, so you do have to be mindful of that. The righty backhand play is usually just between the trees. Lefty backhand is a little more complicated. I usually try to throw a little bit of a turnover and go out left. But today I decided to change it up and throw my PD2, just something real stable, and throw it out to the right and give myself a hyzer approach from the right side. Put it out to the right exactly how I wanted. I'd say probably around 260, maybe 270 from the basket. Looking at an easy hyzer approach. Now, when stepping up to my lie, the ground out here was actually super soft. I don't normally throw from here, so I had to be real mindful about my run-up so that I didn't twist my ankle. Throwing my C-Line MD4 here on a gentle hyzer. Just want to throw something overstable just to make sure that you don't go into the culvert, because that is just behind the basket to the left. And actually was afraid that I threw it OB on the right because the fence line does come into play right over there next to the basket. Got up to my lie, was not OB, but was in the brush a little bit, just barely on the edge, so I didn't have any problem stepping in there. Probably about 15 feet, stepped in with a straddle putt, a little bit of twigs and stuff in my swing, but nothing I couldn't handle. And as you can see, the OB is probably about 2 feet to my right there, so it definitely does come into play on this hole if you're not careful with your approach. And jam this straddle putt for an easy birdie to start off the back nine. Moving on to hole 11, we have definitely the most difficult hole on the course. 375-foot par 3. If you can see the kind of slanted tree out there, the basket is probably about 100 feet further and over to the left. The only OB is the culvert that runs right through the middle of it, so it definitely does come into play. For the righty backhand, it's a pretty stock hyzer, but still a pretty tight line with some low ceiling. For the lefty, it's definitely a late flip turnover shot. Very difficult for me to reach. I'm stepping up here with my Neo instinct, just throwing something out flat and straight. Don't want to mess with that turnover because every single time I do, I wind up hitting a tree early. So just want to play it out straight and work from there. That straight play works out pretty much exactly how I drew it up, and I wind up about 90 feet from the basket over to the right. The culvert's right in the middle, but that shouldn't come into play. Step up with my active sensei here. Going to basically try to throw it in. Hope for a bonus birdie for this one. Leak it out a little bit to the right, but I'm perfectly fine with that. More often than not, I will take par on this hole. I have bogeyed this hole many times as well because this hole is just very difficult. So anytime I can collect par on this hole, I'm definitely happy with it. I step up to my lie, and I'm really a little bit further than I want it to be, probably about 12 or 13 feet, but still a pretty routine putt. Shouldn't be any problem. But of course I got to give you a show, and I just barely squeak it over the rim. Either way, definitely happy to take par on this hole and move on to hole 12. As we move on to hole 12, we have a 290-foot par 3, slightly downhill. No OB really to speak of unless it slips out of your hand and rolls 100 feet in front of you into the culvert. The basket is tucked just behind the two trees that are almost touching one another out in center frame. It's just behind the right tree. Righty or lefty backhand play is just pretty much a stock hyzer, but you do have to be mindful of the trees on the right if you're a righty backhand because those can come into play. I'm throwing my Neo Instinct here again, trying to aim for the gap that's just barely right of where I wind up hitting, and trying to basically make a field goal there. Wind up going just a little bit left, but not too much of a pull really, and I wind up leaving myself about 25 feet from the basket for my birdie putt. Previously, I have been throwing mid-range on this hole and just really trying to rip on it, but I found that more often than not, I wind up turning it over and throwing it too far left, so I find that the easy fairway driver throw is much simpler and much more controlled. So step up to my putt here, 25 feet, and jam it left side perfectly to take another birdie for the round. Moving on to hole 13, we have a 260-foot par 3, pretty much identical to hole 6 on the course. Basket is tucked just to the right around the corner of the woods. This is basically the same throw, really for the righty and the lefty. Righty, you really want to push a flex forehand and get something to finish late in the flight. As a lefty, I'm going to be throwing my MD4 here, trying to push it straight and let it finish just a little bit towards the basket at the end of the flight. The one notable difference with this hole and hole 6 is you do have the overhand play as well if you'd like, and I have a buddy who loves to throw tomahawk on this hole and has actually aced it a couple of times doing so. But unfortunately my shoulder won't allow me to throw that type of shot, so I have to stick with a pretty stock boring hyzer. My drive works out exactly how I would draw it up, and I give myself a simple 10-footer for another birdie on the day. The next hole in the course, hole 14, is a 355-foot par 3. OB is the driveway on the left and beyond, so you do have to be careful not to grip something or turn something over too hard because that can come into play very quickly. The main gap is center frame between these two trees, and then you also have another gap probably about 120 feet out between two more trees about the same width. The right-handed player can play a multitude of shots, forehand, late turnover, or you've also got this skinny gap over on the right side if you really want to go for it. For the lefty, it's a pretty stock hyzer. Put it through this gap, put it through the other gap, and really push that low ceiling so that you can try to get the distance. I decided to throw my Neo Instinct here and actually throw it a little high and get lucky and push through the branches to give myself about a 15, maybe 17-foot putt for a birdie. This is not a hole that I birdie very often, to be honest, because more often than not I'll push it too high and clip one of those branches and knock down and wind up taking a par. So this one is definitely a bonus birdie for me and a welcome gift. Moving on to hole 15, we have a 255-foot par 3. We have an OB long on the road, so you really want to be careful not to juice it, and the basket is about 80 to 90 feet past the two trees that you see center frame. Righty backhand or lefty backhand, pretty much a hyzer shot. Righty throw around the right side, lefty throw around the left side. Keep it low, don't hit the branches up top, and just park it underneath the basket. I decided to throw my MD3 here and push it really tight to this tree and just let it work its way to the basket, and it looks like an absolute park job. But actually, when I get up to my lie, I find that the hard ground allowed the MD3 to skip and I didn't see it. And there's actually a pretty decent slope off back behind the basket, so it really does bring that OB road into play, so you have to be careful not to throw your drive too hard. Luckily, my drive stops just short of the road, and I give myself probably about a 22 to 25 footer for my birdie putt. So of course another tester, and slightly uphill. But I'm feeling really confident after jamming all of these testers all day and smash it center chains for another birdie. On to hole 16, we have a 240-foot par 3. Basket is directly center frame about 10 feet in front of the light colored tree that you can see there. OB on the left with the road and beyond. The righty backhand play is a pretty stock hyzer straight to the basket, just keep it kind of low. The lefty has a couple of different options. Either grab your straightest disc you can throw and throw it right at the basket, or throw something out to the left through the gap over there and let it hyzer around. I stepped up to the hole intending on throwing straight at the basket with my really beat-in Jawbreaker zone, but actually gripped it and ripped it into that left side gap, but thankfully I threw it kind of high and it hyzered back toward the basket. And with the slight miscue, I actually wind up with the coveted grip it and still park it scenario and put myself just 5 feet away for an easy tap-in birdie. Hole 17, we have the final par 4 on the course at 400 feet. The basket is straight out ahead between the two trees that you can see there, just slightly right of center frame. The only OB to speak of is long in the basket with the road and beyond, so unless you have a pro level distance, you're probably not reaching the OB on your drive. The righty backhand is a pretty stock hyzer through the right side, but the lefty, you can either play the turnover through the right side, or you could rip a pushing hyzer out to the left side and rip around this tree. I actually try to do the turnover with my glow crank, grip it again, and send it out left, but again get lucky and push myself about 75 to 80 feet from the basket for an awesome look at an eagle. Currently, this distance is really just out of my step or jump putt range, honestly, so I really prefer to throw something from about this far and just try to give it a very gentle touch. So I step up with my active sensei and just hope and pray that I can dunk this for a beautiful eagle that I do not deserve. Wind up throwing it just over the basket, but I'm perfectly fine with that and give myself an easy 10-footer to tap in for my birdie. And finally, we head into the last hole of the day, hole 18, 340 foot, par 3, slightly uphill. The basket is directly center frame. Righty or lefty backhand is just pretty much a stock hyzer. My Neo instinct has put so much work in for me today that I decided to take it on one more run and throw it at this basket and see if I can give myself one more birdie look to finish out the day, or possibly an ace, who knows. I throw it out nice and straight left of the basket, but it winds up hooking up a little bit earlier than I want to and gives me about a 20-footer look for my birdie. And of course, it wouldn't be a proper round if I didn't give myself at least one more tester from about 20 to 22 feet just to make sure that I'm capable of hitting this distance on a putt. And with that, I cam my final birdie for the round and take a solid 15 under par to finish the day. And with that, guys, we wrap up Walker Park here in Paris, Texas. It's a pretty short course, pretty simple. You're not going to see any pro-level golfers coming out here, but it's really great for that intermediate or beginner-level player to really come out, learn the sport, learn some shapes in a wide open space. You have some gaps if you want to work on it. You have some good turnover shots if you want to work on it. You kind of have a little bit of everything. I've got some buddies of mine, and we come out here once a week, and we have a really great time. I love this course, and I play it every single week and have a good time every single time. And that's it, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I enjoyed doing this commentary style video, and I'd like to do more courses around the Northeast Texas area. So let me know what you liked, and let me know what I can work on to make these videos even better for you. This is Adam with High Action Disc Golf, and I'll catch you on the high road.